everybody, and welcome to the book release of Malevolent Republic, A Short History of the New India by Kapil Komireddi. The book was published earlier this year before the election results came out. So there are a couple of things about the book that are really interesting. One is that if you've spent any time on social media, or if you've spent any time in the comments section of any publication that has its articles online, anything that you say in criticism will bring out a bunch of people who will tell you, but what about this? So if you say 2002, everyone will say, what about 1984? You know, so there's this whole what about and a demand for even-handedness. If you read Malevolent Republic, you will not be able to criticize the book on grounds that it is not even-handed, because it critiques everyone, whether it is the present government or previous governments. So that is one thing that I'd like you to know about the book. The other thing is, you know, it says it's a short history of the new India, which means it's a history of the present moment. And the present moment being what it is, events move at a breakneck speed. From the time this book was published, several things have changed. Several things that were predicted in the book have come to pass, have expanded beyond the scope of what was in the book. So it is a history of the present moment. And to that extent, as a history, what it does is it shapes the narrative of the present moment. So, you know, our short-term memory is not long. You know, we forget things. We forget things that happened 4 years ago. We forget things that happened last year because more things have happened since then. So this is a book that gives shape to the recent past. And these are the things that are really interesting about this book. Kapil was educated in India and in England. And he is a journalist and a critic. He's written for the Washington Post, he's written for the Guardian, the New York Times. He's reported from the Middle East at the start of the civil war in Syria. He's reported extensively over Eastern Europe, from South Asia, from Pakistan. This is his debut book. This is his debut novel. I mean, sorry, not a novel, I'm so sorry. This is his debut book. Mohan Guruswamy should be familiar to anyone who lives in Hyderabad. He's a columnist. He is the founder and chairman of the Center for Policy Alternatives, a think tank based in Delhi. He's written several books, partially academic, partially popular, not popular history, but deeply researched history. His areas are China. One of your books is about China. And all of his columns are eagerly read by people in Hyderabad because it appears in the Deccan Chronicle. More recently, he started the Guruswamy Center in Secunderabad, which is a place a lot like Lamakaan in encouraging cultural activities and debate and getting civil society together. I welcome all of you to the book release of Malevolent Republic. I'll ask Mohan and Kapil to both release copies of the book.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Sridala, for that very generous introduction. And in answer to your question, is all of India's history malevolent? I think not. I think India's history is profoundly complex, and it can't be distilled into one adjective, obviously. But the malevolence comes from the actions of the actors whom we've put on a pedestal over the years. So in your introduction you mentioned that when we talk about 2004, 2002 people talk about 1984. So there are events in India's history that have lapsed from our memory, and I wanted to spotlight those events and analyze those events. And as I started investigating the relatively recent history of this republic, I found so much. There's a buried history there, which is almost in front of us, and yet we don't seem to pay much attention to it. We talk about it, and yet we forget it. So I wanted to focus on those things. These are things in which so many good people were caught up, and people who otherwise had done many good things, such as Nehru, have done many things that were profoundly anti-democratic. So I wanted to give a forthright accounting of those events, and that's why I used the phrase Malevolent Republic.
I keep dealing with this subject on how much of a success or how much of a failure the Republic has been. And there are some huge monumental failures about India. And there are some huge successes also. It's not as if, it's a totally one-sided record. But right now what we are seeing in the last 30, 40 years is the failure of the Republic to be functional, to be benevolent, to generate results, and the failure of the complete system of government. At the time of independence, India had 320 million people, out of which 280 million people were below the poverty line. And last year, we had 300 million people below the poverty line. So you have to keep asking yourself the question that, have we succeeded or have we failed? But Kapil here dealt with the politics of India. And the politics of India has been a dismal story, particularly in the last 30, 40 years. It's been getting worse and worse. And I think we're witnessing the republic in its throes, final throes. And as it might change very thoroughly and radically in the next few years. We'll have to see what happens. I also have a way that India has a way of correcting itself. Government suddenly disappeared. I remember when Rajiv Gandhi became Prime Minister, we used to sit and the congressmen used to jeer, saying, what are you people opposing us for? We have 450 seats and we will be here for 1,000 years. But 4 years later, he was looking for a job, poor fellow. And we've seen the Vajpayee government where again there was talk of, as part of, but I was in that government for a while as the economic advisor, and the same feeling was there. Everybody used to say, the politicians, कि अब हम नहीं जा रहे. And country had a way of correcting itself. So the only Prime Minister in the last few years whose fall we could predict was Manmohan Singh. Poor chap, the economy went into such a dive, and he was a victim of such a vicious propaganda. I saw our friend Vinod Rai on TV last night, and he literally overturned a system, a government with some bogus theories of his own, opportunity costs and opportunity losses. Resulted in a fall of a regime, but not a single person been convicted. All those who were charged have all been acquitted. So he was asked this question yesterday. So he had no real answer. So so to that extent we have been a big failure, and I tend to agree with Kapil's thesis that, but whether it's malevolent or whether it is an accidental failure or whether it's an intentional failure, we can still discuss.
Well, I can't disagree with all of that, all of what Mohan has said. I will say in response to Manmohan Singh that in my book he doesn't come across as a very nice man, and that's because his government was a victim in retrospect of a concerted propaganda. But if you consider his reign for 10 years, I find that period to be a very sinister phase in Indian democracy, and I'll explain why. Manmohan Singh was never elected to any office in his life. He never won an election in his life. And his appointment to the Prime Minister's office was an expression of contempt for Indian democracy. I know procedurally he could have been Prime Minister and he became Prime Minister, but he'd never won an election. He never had contact with ordinary people. And in the 10 years that he was Prime Minister, the people at the very top, India's billionaire count rose, India's millionaire count rose, but its poverty figures. People moved from dire poverty into tolerable destitution. That's not something to be tremendously proud about. And I presume many of you remember Operation Green Hunt, in which the most sophisticated arms were transported to the most impoverished parts of India to take out some of the most, desperate, miserable people on the planet. And the glorification of Manmohan Singh really is a product, in my view, of a campaign run by people who were beneficiaries of his policies. And his come down, I thought, was a kind of, a belated comeuppance for the policies he'd been advancing, in which people, there's a wonderful Princeton historian called Atul Kohli. He writes that India had become a two-track democracy under Manmohan Singh, in which common people were only required at the time of elections. After the elections, they were expected to go home and let the rational elites run a quietly pro-business show.
Do you think that's something to do that started with Manmohan Singh's time?
No,
it's been a long while since we've done anything but elect our leaders.
It was taken to the very most extremes by Manmohan Singh, because previous prime ministers had avenues for contact with people. Manmohan Singh absolutely didn't know what people wanted. For all the years that he was prime minister, bar the last two, I think 16,000 people, farmers, killed themselves every year. To exalt this man as some kind of an embodiment of decency in politics. I equate him to Pinochet in my book, and that might upset a lot of people, but I met his victims. I've seen the people disfigured by his policies, whose lives have been disfigured, deformed by his policies, and I don't have a great deal of sympathy for him.
No, I don't have any sympathy for Manmohan either, and people like me made a living poking fun at him and jeering at him when he was in office. And I've actually poked fun and jeered at every Prime Minister who has been in this country, except possibly with Jawaharlal Nehru, and I was too young. But as far as farmer suicides are concerned, I'd like to say something which would fly against conventionally accepted wisdom and logic. In 1996, I did a research project in Bundelkhand on farmer suicides. We said the first big story on farmer suicide in Bundelkhand. So when I went to Bundelkhand, I asked the district collector, I said, what is the baseline suicide rate? So they have baseline suicide rates for the last 20 years before that or whatever. And I said, what are the jump now? Because there's no jump.
So he was saying it's been the same for 20 years.
Yeah, people commit suicide. That is an incidence, is a part of general population because of business failures or whatever, unrequited love, whatever. And there are some peculiar situations which arise. The poorest country in part of India is Bihar. And Bihar has the lowest suicide rate. Everybody in Bihar, 80% of Bihar lives below the poverty line. 80% of Bihar, which means in poverty line in India means that one meal a day, and you're effectively starving. So the suicide rate is high in coastal Andhra, because this whole business of wanting to get rich and you invest and you borrow money. Vidarbha, there are pockets of high suicide rates. But to say that, economic policies, there are business failures even in happiness and in plenty, and people can commit suicide. So I even published my piece on that several times, and in my book on Indian agriculture, I've analyzed it, saying that this is the worst industry you can pick up. Saying suicides. People commit suicide for various reasons. Good times, bad times. And why did this man jump from the river the other day, this billionaire? You know. But you know, Manmohan Singh's government was also a regime where we had economic growth rates which we have never seen before and will possibly never see again.
We're definitely not seeing it now.
No, certainly we had an average of 8.2% in real GDP, not nominal. Nominal is about 5-6% more than that. Nominal rates were phenomenal during his time, when they were about 14-15%. You will not see that again, because what we've had in the last 4 years is an act of vandalism. The economy was lurching along quite well till this man brought two things. He brought demonetization. I call it namonetization, because everything was going well. And I remember that evening when he announced demonetization, November 8, 2016. I was at home in Secunderabad. I had some friends over for dinner, and so they said, you know, Prime Minister is going to speak. So we all put on the TV, and this man made this fantastic. And I thought, you know, is he mad? Something gone wrong with this fellow? Because this is not demonetization. Demonetization is when your currency is revalued. When you have such high inflation that you make 100 rupees 10 rupees and say that is demonetization.
Yeah.
What you had is a note exchange.
Yeah.
It's been done in the world before. Anyway, half an hour into his speech, NDTV got hold of me. They sent a crew to my house, camera and all that. And I said, they said, what do you think? I said, it's an act of vandalism. Everything going well. There's a fellow who goes to a museum. There's a lot of paintings, they start scratching them. Yeah. And this is exactly what this man is doing. And then you had GST. Now, GST is very peculiar. This is something which you didn't really touch in the book, because our typical tax rates, incidences in India were 30%, 30-35%. If you bought the stable, you bought wood, you paid tax on that, you paid tax for the varnish, you paid tax for the decollage, and it all cascaded to something which was about 35-36%. And what is the maximum rate you have in GST? 28%, 18%. So where is the money going to come from?
So is it a question, Kapil, of, I mean, again, we're back to this thing of malevolence, right? This sounds like incompetence to me. It does not sound like malevolence. So, but definitely there is malevolence. So, you know, what about this deadly combination of incompetence and malevolence, and what does this do to our polity and our society?
The incompetence is an integral part of Modi's ideology. They are, demonetization really is a product of hubris. It is this belief that this man who was addicted to praise from people. When he was in Gujarat, people went to Gujarat, Mukesh Ambani, Anil Ambani. Every great industrialist, Tata, went to Gujarat and said, you are the great hope of India. And this man comes to Delhi and thinks, I've got an idea to fix everything. And I'm going to deal with the problem of black money and terrorism by just banning these notes, by taking them out of circulation. And he does that, he plots that move, he plans that move with the aid of only about 4 or 5 of his closest allies within the government, closest advisors. And one of them has a PhD in yoga, you know. And he believes, he has this tremendous self-belief born of people paying him endless compliments. And this is part of the authoritarian streak in Modi. He comes out, he announces that policy, and you see that again in foreign policy as well. Pakistan is such an intractable challenge for India, and he announces his visit to Pakistan on Twitter, as though he's just figured it out, and he's going to resolve that problem. And as soon as he comes back, there's a terror attack. And I go on to explain this neurotic nationalism of Pakistan that provokes this kind of response. But Modi's malevolence is very much part. Modi's incompetence is integral to his ideology, to the kind of person he is. He believes that being authoritarian, getting things done, means having done them. So he'll order people to build toilets. Whether or not the toilets have water is something we don't have to really focus upon. So he claims to do things without actually seeing them through. He loves to be in the newspapers, he loves to be on television as the man getting things done, but things really are never done.
So, you know, I'm reminded of Ambedkar's speech in the Constituent Assembly where he warns against our tendency as Indians towards the bhakti marg, you know, not to hero worship anyone. He says, you know, all the civil disobedience and everything that Gandhi has done was fine for its time, but you can't have anarchy all the time. You have to follow the Constitution and what it does. It seems to me in your book that you often critique the people rather than the policies, because the policies flow from the people. I was wondering whether this is something that, you know, this is another intractable problem. We like to have heroes that we want to worship. How do we function as a democracy and as a republic that requires, it requires that you not cede your liberty and your ability to exercise your rights and hand it over to someone else. It's either seized or we've handed it over to someone else willingly. How do we get past this stage of our being a republic?
I think that might come, that kind of republicanism, that kind of democratic spirit might actually be incubated in response to Modi. Because we've always had towering personalities from the beginning of the country. We had Mahatma Gandhi, we had Ambedkar, we had Nehru, we had Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi. And then Narasimha Rao, not so much. That's when India became massively democratic because it was a coalition government, a minority government. But the kind of place you envisage, a democracy with a true republican spirit, composed of individuals, abiding by the law and not surrendering to the cult of leadership. I think that is not going to come about anytime soon, but I think we might see the beginnings of that in the resistance to Modi that comes about in the future. Because Mohan said something very interesting at the beginning. He said, when Rajiv Gandhi was in power, they said, we'll be here eternally. Vajpayee said the same thing. Modi believes the same, that he'll be here eternally, but he will have damaged, he's already destroyed, vandalized the institutions necessary for the functioning of our democracy. But there will be, his excesses, I think, will also, his excesses, I feel, will also provoke a response. And the kind of response it will be will determine what kind of a country India will become. If the response is of the Arvind Kejriwal variety, then we'll see a kind of, we'll see, you guys have seen Kejriwal's response to the abrogation of 370. He welcomed it.
Yes.
So he is not that different in so many ways. You know, he represents the moneyed middle classes of Delhi. And will there be a different kind of reaction to Modi? Will it be Kanhaiya Kumar? Will it be whose politics will embody the overwhelming response, the dominant responce to Modi?
You're looking for another personality.
I know, I can't look beyond persons for the simple reason that we are such an enormous country, and we need a figure who can mobilize people. And that's the reason I would like to believe, and I hope that we can move past that, but I fear we will be bogged down in that for some time.
So before I ask Mohan for his contribution on something, I'm just taking off from what you're saying, I have this to ask you. You said, you know, I can't think of anybody because we're a big nation and you know, we tend to focus on personalities. But if there is a lacuna in your book, it has to do with the question of caste and anti-caste movements. That makes only very minor appearances in your book. And if you're looking for something that's not personality driven, your anti-caste movement is right there to provide you with so many iterations of it, whether it's Mayawati and Kanshiram before that, whether it's the DMK, whether it's the Dalit Panthers in Maharashtra, whether it's in Telangana, whether it's in the field of literature, whether it's in the field of organization. These are not personality focused largely, they exist beyond the one or two personalities that people tend to focus on. Why is it so absent in your book?
I'll give you a personal answer to that. Why is it absent? All the things you mentioned, I don't necessarily disagree with you, although I believe there are personality cults within those movements. Not as big, but there are. And the reason they're absent from my book is because I have not intimately considered the subject. I grew up in a place where caste was an issue, and I didn't like that. I didn't have to deal with it. And perhaps it's an aspect of that privilege that I didn't want to talk about something I didn't fully appreciate. And I thought people who've looked at it, dealt with it, have done a far better job and are doing a far better job of talking about it and dissecting it. And I didn't want to offer expertise where I had none. Caste obviously is fundamental to how India functions. I am of that school of thought who believes that we should move beyond caste, that oppression in the name of caste, the victims of caste oppression are many, but there are many more who claim to be victims of oppression of caste oppression when they are not. And I know people who are like that, who talk about that. And I didn't want to delve into that because it was just, I didn't have the expertise, and it was just too close to the bone in some places. I hope that answered.
I know I can't satisfy you about it, but later. Mohan, would you like to respond to, what is present, what is absent, or what you feel you might have, what perspectives you might have missed?
I don't know much about the caste divisions in different parts of the country, because they are unique to different parts of the country. In the North India, UP and Bihar, which I probably know better than I know the Telangana and Andhra, the castes are all vertical silos, about equisized. Today in UP and Bihar, you can't deal with a Dalit the way you dealt with 20 years ago, 25, or here.
So that has to do with affirmative action, right?
No, it has not to do with affirmative action. It's the sense of empowerment which they've all got with Kanshiram's movement and with Mayawati also.
With the Mandal Commission report.
Mandal Commission, yes. Mandal Commission really dealt with empowering the true oppressor of rural India in North India. The backward caste, if you ask any Dalit, who is your immediate oppressor, he'll say the other. Because these are the guys we live with, and these are the guys who beat us up, these are the guys who don't let us harvest on time, etc., etc. So, it's a very difficult situation in different parts of the country. But the militancy which one expects has still not generated. You had a phase of Dalit militancy which has now been further fragmented into chamars and mushars and different things, which is something in which Hindu society is very good at fragmenting your adversaries. But they sit up and count them. You can't ignore them. They are on the high table. And that is the big difference which is taking place in India. But the question I'd like to ask Kapil is, how much of a democracy are we really today? Is there a democracy? Is India a democracy? Does it function? Does it work?
It is so democracy isn't just voting, right? A lot of talks I did abroad, quite a few of Modi's supporters would ask me, would hurl this in my face that Modi has been voted. He's won a legitimate election. That is true, but elections are one part of democracy. There are checks and balances, there are institutions. So what Modi represents is this democratic authoritarianism. You win at the ballot box, then you govern as an authoritarian. So we are a democracy in the sense that if people don't, if you don't serve people well, you can be voted out of office. Broadly, that is true. But when you zoom in and you look at the reality of things, there are ways to win elections. People have written about it. Milind Vaishnav wrote a great book about it, about the influence of money in our elections now. And in the last election, in the recently concluded elections, you all saw the manner in which the Election Commission behaved. This institution is a marvel to behold. For many decades, it has been a marvel to behold. And its conduct in the election was staggering. It conducted itself very differently from the way in which it conducted itself in the past. And then there are organs of the state, police. The machinery of the state is deployed in ways in which is profoundly subversive to democracy. So we are a democracy, of course. Modi abrogated 370 overnight and then had a 2-day debate in Parliament. So he ticked off the procedural requirements. But are we democracy? We have democracy in letter, but are we democracy in spirit? I think increasingly the answer to that question is no.
You brought up 370, so this is one of the things that you spoke about, but perhaps did not anticipate that would actually come to pass at the time that the book was published. And there's a lot that's happening in Kashmir, there's a lot that's happening in the northeast and Assam at the moment, all of which have kind of snowballed out of, out of everything that we imagined might have happened in May when the elections were happening. What are your thoughts on, I'm not going to ask generally about Kashmir itself, but my question really has to do with what are your thoughts on you've talked in your book about identity, about organizing ourselves along religious lines or along lines of identity or ethnicity and so on. So my question is a little complicated. It has to do with your self-determination in this. We are a young state as Telangana, and that movement, although is old from 48 onwards, the statehood issue became a question of self-determination. Just as whether Kashmir wants to stay part of India or not is a question of self-determination. Just as whether your name appears in the NRC or not has to do with ethnic Assamese people's wish to retain some of their ability to define themselves as tribals or whatever it is. How does and we keep saying things like unity and diversity, but how does it function? How can do we want unity to mean uniformity? And how much do we allow this, it's not a question of allow really, but how do we accommodate self-definition along religious, along ethnic and along regional lines, linguistic even?
That's a remarkable question. There are quite a few questions in them. To unpack it, I think India is the answer to that. We were a shimmering example of how you accommodate diversity in so many ways, at least on paper, and in many ways in practice. Now, you mentioned self-determination. That's a troubling concept, because self-determination often converts oppressed minorities into oppressive majorities. Yes. Because you say that you are oppressed by a majority, and you don't vote as individuals, you vote as a community. But what about the minority within the minority? What about them? Do you have another referendum for them? Then do you have another referendum, and you continue to divide? I think the answer to that is to just accept difference, to accept that people are different, people speak different languages, people eat different foods, people have different complexions, and people are different. India is a staggeringly diverse country. All around us, look around us, you find people who have different religions, different castes, different ethnicities, speak different languages, and yet we say we are Indian. And Indianness is this answer we've arrived at because we can't really solve the question. And that is a phenomenal achievement. And what Modi is trying to do, the biggest problem I have with religious nationalism is to define people by one identity. We as human beings are repositories of multiple identities. You can be a feminist and a writer and a Hindu or a Muslim. What he's saying is that one of those identities must predominate, and that is a blueprint for trouble. Pakistan has been there. Muhammad Ali Jinnah tried that, and I've been to Pakistan. You really don't want to become Pakistan, and that is my biggest concern about India, is that we are trying to impose a predominant identity upon ourselves when we have always accepted that we are repositories of multiple identities. And India should not become that Procrustean state, that Pakistan-like state, a Hindu version of Pakistan. We should run away from that. We should be proud to be what we are. We are an extraordinary country. And Modi's ideology is the antithesis of that ideology. It's trying to divide people. And that's my biggest concern about him. And 370, Kashmiris now see themselves, even mainstream pro-Indian Kashmiris are in jail. These are people who argued for, who said we are Indian. They can't show themselves in public now. There are two kinds of Kashmiris now. There are separatists and there are people who will be mocked by separatists. This is the kind of detonation Modi has achieved in Kashmir. And South India is different from the North. Eventually people will start asking questions. In 1989, a man called Milosevic, Slobodan Milosevic, went to Raif Distarovic, who was the president of Yugoslavia, and he asked from him powers to abrogate the autonomy of Vojvodina and Kosovo. And Serb nationalists rejoiced. They thought this was the beginning of the consolidation of the Serb nation. It was actually the beginning of the end of Yugoslavia, the great experiment in multi-ethnic nationalism in Europe. And I don't want India to go down that road. And in Modi, I see many of the traits of Milosevic.
You see, the profound change is coming in India, is happening now, is that we are changing character from being an aspirational republic, where everybody could aspire to different things and we were trying to reconcile different aspirations together, to a monolithic society, monochromatic also, one color and one big society, united by something quite as unreasonable as, as religion, and something quite as imaginary as, a mythology which is being converted into history. So, when this man, the Minister for Culture, said he wants to get history rewritten, and he wants history to begin with Ramayana. Now, we're not going to do any real delving into our history, but we will start. So I said, how are you going to, I wrote at that time that the first thing you need to do is then make Hanuman a human being. So do that first and we'll talk to you. So you'll have to rewrite your way of thinking and everything, because in the 20th century or 21st century you can't say that there were androids 2000 years ago. So but he is taking us towards that unreasonable state, which is, and I personally think that if he takes us further into that, because he can't do anything on the economy. The economy is going to take, as an economist I will tell you, it's going to take 5 years before you see a turnaround. GDP growth, which the government is lying, saying is 5%, is actually around 2.5%. And so the economy is not going to turn around soon. So he'll have to do something. So he will keep giving us new temples, new histories, new genealogies, and all that to keep us going. And somewhere that is going to crack. Now he has built this whole thing on Northeast on Gusbaitis and called them the Dimaks, saying that I'm going to throw them all out. What's happening in the south? The biggest minority now in Kerala are 9.5% Biharis. there is internal migration. When do we see parts of India start treating North Indians as Guzbaitis and as Dhimaks? Because, you know, to us they all look the same. So, you know, I think the beginning he's sowing the seeds of, and this country was only together like this after 1857. And in 1947 we became one unitary, one big state. But throughout history, the South was never ruled from Delhi. The South was always ruled by itself. Even after the Battle of Talikota in 1548, the South effectively ruled itself. And for the first time we are being ruled from Delhi. The Mughals never ruled the South. And the South is voting differently and behaving differently. Demographically it's moving at a different pace. Economically it's moving at a different pace. Questions will start being asked. And unless you can give us all a common aspiration to look forward to. But the minute you start saying that I will start repainting road signs in Hindi, then you're getting into problem areas. And I think we're getting into this problem area. May not happen in my lifetime, but certainly on the road. And a person who hasn't read history is bound to repeat the mistakes of history. The man who believes that Alexander was defeated on the banks of the Ganges opposite Patna, you know, is out to write our history again. And that is the danger we're facing now.
I just wanted to say in response to that is terrifying for me to hear while Mohan was speaking. That has long been my greatest fear, the breakup of India, because we have this idea that India is eternal, India will just keep going on, India is divinely ordained. India is not divinely ordained, India exists as a united republic. Our history, our culture is antique, but our unity is very recent. India exists as a united entity because of the genius of the founders of this republic. And we broke apart 70 odd years ago. We've known partition. And to think that we cannot break apart again is really delusional. And I think the answer to Modi's Hindu nationalism is really not to say that we are different, it's to assert our Indianness, not to see ourselves as non-Indian, but to see ourselves as more Indian. This is our country, is how I'd like to think. This man is not, he doesn't embody Indianness, all of us do. And the answer to his divisiveness is not more division, it is more unity. And yeah, I have this fear ever since I wrote about Yugoslavia and read about Yugoslavia, that great nations can fall apart, just like that. And we should try as best as we can to preserve India, to keep India's unity.
You know, Mohan, you said in a recent column, you said this JNK, Jammu and Kashmir, with or without Pakistan occupied Kashmir is an artificial entity of recent origin. It's long past its use by date is what you said. And you're saying something similar, Kapil. You're saying that nothing is preordained. It's not like we have a destiny to be this entity forever. Things have changed, they will change again. I was reminded of Ursula Le Guin's acceptance speech at the National Book Award, where she says, we live in capitalism, its power seems inescapable, but so did the divine right of kings. And any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begins in art, and very often in our art, the art of words. It seems to me at the end of your book that your outlook was a little more bleak than this hopeful thing. But I think through our conversation, I changed my mind about your bleakness, about the outlook of the nation. I think this is a great place to end our conversation. I'd like to open it out to the audience. If there's a mic that can be passed around. So the other thing I'd like to request is that you ask questions and not make statements, please, and keep them brief, because I'm sure there are many people who have things they'd like to ask Kapil.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you brought up the example of Serbia and Serbian nationalism. I think it's a very good example that needs to be better understood in our public discourse. My question to you is very simply, is what, on your account or in your understanding, is the driver of this malevolence? I have no quarrel with malevolence as a kind of underlying theme of functioning of the Indian state. But what is driving this malevolence in your view? Is it merely malevolent individuals, or is there something deeper that is working through?
I think it begins with the desire to do good. I think Nehru begins to subvert democracy in order to keep India united, in order to throw away. There is a wonderful quote by an American writer called Matthew Scully. He says, when you begin by doing something as a necessary evil, what remains when the necessity passes away? Nehru did certain things because he thought they were necessary evil. Under Indira Gandhi, the necessity passed away, and what remained was pure evil in many areas. And with Sanjay, it was extraordinary, as you know. And then they set the example that others didn't reverse. They exploited that example. And as things moved forward, as you've seen from my book chronologically, by the time we arrive at Rajiv Gandhi, he begins to make concessions, extraordinary concessions to both Hindu nationalists and Muslim fundamentalists. And the state actors taking malevolent actions, end up surrendering to malevolent forces, populist forces within the country. And that becomes the norm. I think when you build an institution, or when you build something good, breaking it takes very little time, and rebuilding it takes generations. And once a bad example is set, as it had been by Indira and her son, we haven't really recovered from that, I think. We really haven't recovered. We had an election after that in which she was voted out of power, and her son lost his deposit. And we think that was the end of it. But we haven't really recovered from what they did to this country. We continue down that path. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that talk. I'm really happy to be here. My question is in response to the answer you just gave to this question. You mentioned this one particular event by Indira Gandhi where we haven't recovered from it. But are there also events you can see that kind of reverse this? Events that could give hope in a manner of speaking?
I'll give you one brief answer to that. Punjab, where Congress was seen as an evil force for what it did with Operation Blue Star, is now in power again. So there is absolutely hope. It depends on how you deal with the difficult questions in front of you. And Captain Amarendra Singh has brought Congress back to power in a state where Congress-led was seen as a terrorist force. I think that's your example right there.
I have two questions. One is, Kapil, you equated Doklam with the 1962 China war. In your book, you equated in terms of the loss, saying that the loss in Doklam to India was more than that of Indo-China War 1962. I thought it was needless exaggeration, your comment on that. My second question is, you said the Indian media surrendered to Modi, but the American media did not to Trump. What to Trump? So what are the reasons for that?
In answer to your first question, I was not equating the two. I was making the argument, just to clarify, it's there in the book. I was making the argument that Modi dislikes Nehru, says Nehru is a failure. I was saying that what happened in 1962 was a failure because Nehru was caught by surprise. He was not expecting the Chinese to behave the way they did. With Doklam, we already had accumulated tremendous experience of Chinese behavior. In spite of that, Doklam ended up as a failure. So I said, in that regard, it's a profound failure of a man who constantly mocks Nehru, but wasn't able to do something. Nehru actually managed to get American assistance. Here, Trump was absent when we were, our soldiers went had fist fights with the Chinese, and America basically was absent. So that's the point I was making. And your second question was about legacy. I was talking about legacy media. In America, there is the Atlantic, the New Yorker, the New York Times, which have played a very vital role in asserting the independence of the press against the assaults and threats of Donald Trump. I worked with people there and they have come under tremendous pressure. As you know, Donald Trump constantly issues threats on his Twitter feed, and they've somehow stood up to him. Whereas in India, journalists who've stood up to the Prime Minister have seen their careers gone to the dogs. You've seen what happened. I list the number of people who've been squeezed because they've had the temerity to challenge the Prime Minister. And why I think the proprietors in India, the wealthy, the rich men and women in America who purchase these legacy media, for the Atlantic, for instance, has produced extraordinary journalism detailing Trump's actions. In India, we've got few magazines that do that, but they do that under tremendous strain. So they don't have the resources that the American media does, because people aren't willing to put them, because people aren't willing to antagonize the Prime Minister, because the consequences are very dire.
Okay, I'm also going to ask the same question as someone did before me regarding hope. This is hope in the sense of the institutions that we're all talking about. Now, I'd be stating the obvious if I said that, the institutions have just crumbled. And to be fair to Modi, like you said, it started much before him. It's only come to an extent which I feel is irreparable now. So is there any hope? Now we have, to draw a comparison between Trump's America and Modi's India. Over there in America, I mean, both Trump and Modi have displayed more or less many similar traits. Like you said, he shoots off, at 3 a.m. in the morning, crazy Twitter feeds and stuff like that. But there are checks and balances there. Whereas it's not the same thing here. You just spoke about the media, but that's just one of the things. There are other institutions as well, which are well under control in America, but not so in India. So do you see any hope going forward? You have to completely rebuild all our institutions. Is that going to ever happen?
I think we can't abandon hope. And if the answer is the breakup of India or, extreme authoritarianism, tyranny, I would like to hope that we will have a resistance to Modi. And I think it's already taking place in many parts of India. I think the question for me is, what kind of India will we build? Will we have to? There is no question in my mind, really, that to go back to the pristine institutions is not only impossible, but even to correct them, to take them back to the state they were in before their dismantling, their detrition began, is the work of generations. It'll take, I think, decades to do that. And it requires citizenly commitment. And will Modi provoke that in us, is the question. And I think he's doing that in parts of the world. I know young people from LSE in London who've moved back to India, and quite a few people who've moved within India, my friends, who are going into villages and setting up secular shakas in response to the RSS shakas. There are many people dealing with this threat in various ways, and I think we are seeing the flowering of a resistance. It will take time before it actually acquires a formidable shape, but I think I haven't lost hope. I think there is hope for India. India is a great country. It will take a lot more than this man to destroy it.
But in India, caste system itself is an history. Am I right? So what is your advice to abrogation of this caste system in India? Because caste system in India is professionalism. When you talk about history, I quote from the Megasthenes Indica, where the people were 18 professionals. They become the caste after that. So what do you say to abrogation of this caste system? Because caste system in India is everything. It is connected with elections, politics, everything. So what do you say about it? How we can abrogation of the caste system in India? Do you have any solution? Do you have any suggestion? Or any? You can't relate it to the reservations also. Reservations are protected discrimination, as it said in Constitution of India. So please, generalize it.
Thank you. I don't have a solution. That's an incredible challenge. I can't come up with a solution to that.
You can change your religion in India. You cannot change your class.
Yeah. I think I think it falls down to individuals. I think each of us as individuals can rise above it if we can. That's easy for me to say perhaps because I haven't been victimized in the name of caste, but there are people who are victimized in the name of caste and they don't have that option. I was reading an extraordinary memoir by Sujata Gidla, who's also from here, called Ants Among Elephants, which I reviewed for The Economist. And the kind of suffering she details, what the Dalits in this country have endured. And every time I hear people say Hinduism is benevolent, Hinduism is the most beautiful religion in the world, I keep thinking, how can you completely overlook this staggering fact in front of you? Now, V.S. Naipaul says Indians have a way of looking and a way of seeing. We look without seeing. And I think when we talk about Hinduism in those exalted terms, we often look, but we don't see. We rationalize caste. The RSS rationalizes its origins, its history, and its atrocities. I think what I would like to do for myself is to rise above it, is to not radiate any prejudice or any affection for anyone in the name of caste, at the same time not radiate any prejudice towards anyone in the name of caste. And if each of us replicated that attitude, I think we might have an answer to this problem. But again, that's almost a facile response to what is a very, very monumental challenge. And I must humbly say that I don't have a solution to that problem. And I thank you for your question.
So my small question here is, like, as right now the Congress party is in crisis in India, so would you like to give any suggestion to the ex-party chief and the present party chief, and even in the state, the Congress is like totally deserted, and there is nobody who can like stand for the party, and even the leaders and everybody are like standing behind, and they don't have any word to talk about because they don't have a majority here, and not even in the country. And the elections are very far, like 5 years down the line. And will the party survive, or do you have any success mantra for the party which can help them out?
Thank you. I don't have anything of that kind, but I think the demise of Congress is perhaps a good thing for the country in the long run, because we have fallen into this habit of looking at Congress as the liberal alternative when it isn't. And when Congress disappears, we'll actually have to come up with a liberal, humane alternative to the BJP. And as long as the Congress remains, we'll continue to harbour this myth that we have this alternative, which it isn't. And if the Congress falls apart, withers away, that's probably a good thing in the long run, and I'm not going to mourn its demise.
What I think is that in the last 70 years, we have made very great strides. And some of the contributing factors were the renaissance that was taking place in different states. And now, where are we? If you compare, if you think about the strides that we had made forward and how much it has taken, in effort and also in time. And now if you are comparing our position, and if you have to go back to that position which we had about 6 years back, how long do you think it will take for us to come back there? I think it is like a building. A building, for making a building, it will take a long time, but destroying is very easy. And I have a second question also. And the second question is that when you had made this kind of book, you should have included the important thing, that biggest influence that is happening in India, that is about the caste system. You cannot write a book, in my opinion, without giving the caste its importance. So I think it was, do you agree that you should have dealt with caste with a little more importance? My third question, okay, I think two questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Your first question was whether we can rebuild institutions, and you used a very clarifying metaphor of a building. It takes a long time to build, it takes a very little time to destroy it. And I've already, in answer to the lady there, I said, the act of rebuilding, the work of rebuilding institutions is the work of generations. It will take decades for us to rebuild that. So I've answered that question in a way. Your second question was about caste. How long it will take? I think it will take generations. It's not a very precise answer, because I can't predict the future, but I do believe that what Modi has done, I think it will take a long time for the minorities who've seen their children lynched to believe once again in India. You know, if you're a mother, my mother was worried when I was attacked sometime I was the victim of a racial attack, and my mother was so profoundly worried, she wanted me to come back. If your son has been lynched, how can you ever believe in that country again? It will take generations for us to win back the confidence of people who've been wronged. Please do.
Why this country? Why there is no protest in this country?
I think there is protest, and this is a form of protest, and I think what you've asked is a very good question, and your anger is exactly the answer to Modi. And you asked me about caste. I'll tell you, I've already tried to answer in various ways about why I didn't touch on caste, but I'll just say that I focused on religion in this book. My interest was communal relationships in this country between Hindus and Muslims and Hindus and Christians and others. And what we've done, you know, this country was born in the hell of partition. And for us to create this extraordinary nation in which Hindus and Muslims, there was a great actor called Raza Murad who once said, when we say Hum Hindustani, we say Ha is Hindu and Ma is Muslim and everyone else is in between. That was the great idea of this country. And that is the idea I was trying to defend against the assault of a man I considered to be the Hindu Jinnah. And I end this book with a poem by Sahir Ludhianvi. A lot of people were migrating out of India. A lot of Muslims were leaving India for Pakistan. Sahir left Pakistan for India and came to Bombay. And in '65, Pakistan waged another war against India, and he wrote this extraordinary poem. He said, "वो वक्त गया, वो दौर गया, जब दो कौमों का नारा था, वो लोग गए इस धरती से जिनका मकसद बंटवारा था, अब एक है सब हिंदुस्तानी, अब एक है सब हिंदुस्तानी." And that is, I think, what we should always strive to be, one India. And our unity must never be compromised in the name of ethno-religious nationalism. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent note on which to end the evening. I thank you all for coming here for this book release and for listening with patience and waiting until the program began. Copies of the book are available for sale, and Kapil is here to sign your copies for you. Thank you, Kapil, and thank you very much, Mohan, for being a part of this.
May we please have a round of applause for Sridala, please. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you.